City Council met in closed session on the items listed on the closed session agenda. Regarding item 4.1.1, an update was provided. Regarding item 4.2.1, an update was provided and direction given to the agency negotiators. And regarding item 4.3.1, a update was provided and direction given to the city attorney. Thank you.
Okay, this is a call to order, and we open up the City Council Special Study Session. Roll call.
Councilmember Martinez?
Here.
Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Councilmember Pats?
Here.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Here.
And Mayor Donahue.
Here.
Move approval of final agenda. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Martinez, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Public comment for consent agenda or items not on the agenda. Seeing none, any ex parte communications concerning the study session? Seeing none, let's start the study session.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, tonight is the last of our series of public presentations on our 2017-2022 Local Hazard Mitigation Plan update. All jurisdictions in the country are required to have an LHMP, Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, in order to receive any funding from the federal government for pre- and post-disasters. These plans are also required to be updated every 5 years. It also makes sense. It's better for us to be proactive than reactive, and by being proactive, we can hopefully reduce the potential for loss of life, injury, and property damage in our community. There are 6 elements required by FEMA in the Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, and I'll be going over each of these in the subsequent slides. So element A is the planning process, and for FEMA, the process is as important as the plan itself. The plan belongs to the community, and FEMA is going to be looking at how we engage the community, our neighboring cities, as well as any outside stakeholders. This slide lists the different ways that we engaged with the community during the last 2 years, from our community survey to our planning team to our updates and our contacts with the outside stakeholders. For element B, the hazard identification and risk assessment process. For this update, we formed a committee to work on this update. The committee consisted of staff members from every department, a representative from Alameda County Fire, and 2 community members. And what the community did is we looked at the hazards that had been identified in our previous plan, that had been identified in ABAG's regional hazard mitigation plan, hazards that had been identified in our neighboring cities. Berkeley had already completed their plan, Oakland was in the process of completing theirs, and Alameda. And we also looked at hazards that had been identified in our community survey. From this information, we identified 9 hazards, both natural and man-made, to be included in the plan update. And then for each hazard, we then identified the impacts that each hazard could have on the city, on our infrastructure, on our community, on our government operations, and our viability. We then analyzed what these impacts could be and what has been done to mitigate these impacts to date. And so here is a screen, and on this screen you'll find that we identified 9, that these are the 9 man-made and natural hazards that we identified, and then all the impacts that we looked at that could impact the city. The next element is the mitigation strategy, and so what the team did is we brainstormed 3 to 5 ideas, mitigation ideas for each hazard that we had identified, and we then took these ideas and we rated them on their feasibility, their social benefits, their economic benefits, their environmental improvement, and their community objectives. And this allowed us to identify which mitigations we felt were most important and which ones were lower down on the totem pole. And so we're able to then identify each mitigation idea in low, medium, or high priority, or as a long-range goal. And these are the 44 mitigation ideas that we identified. The next element is element D, which is the plan review, the evaluation, and implementation. So this section really applies to the updates only. And so here FEMA is looking for what changes have occurred in our community since our last update, what mitigation ideas have we implemented that were in our last plan, what hazards have changed. And so in this plan, we identified some additional hazards, but we also drilled down deeper into the potential impacts on the city for each hazard, and we expanded our mitigation strategies for each hazard. The next steps is really the element E, which is the plan approval. As I've said, we've been presenting the plan to the various city subcommittees, with this being our final presentation. We've been incorporating the recommended changes along the way, and so after this study session, we will put the finishing touches on the plan and submit it to, and try to address any concerns or omissions that are identified tonight, and then submit the plan to CalUS and FEMA for their final approval. And once we receive final approval, then we will come back to the council for adoption. And now we welcome any comments or observations or concerns about the plan.
Do we take public comment first, or do
We
the
can
council?
we can take public comment if there's.
Is there public comment about the plan? Okay, seeing none?
Mr. Mayor? So thank you, Lori, for this many years of work and starting from scratch. As I understand, this was previously done by a consultant, and so you really took it from the ground up. I've submitted to you just my own list of notes, which I don't need to go over in detail. A lot of them are very minor, but there were a couple things that I'm interested in. One is just having a knowledge of what we consider to be soft-story buildings in the community. I'd like to have that information again. The last time we got that report was in 2014, so just wondering which buildings those are and what the status of them is in terms of retrofit. That can come at a later date. And then I'm also interested in automatic shutoff valves for PG&E lines within the city. So, you know, this may not come back with the local hazard mitigation plan, but I'd like to have that information in the appropriate fashion that staff deems necessary, and I will leave that up to you to decide.
Yeah, I've reached out to my contact at PG&E to try to get an answer to that question.
Great, thank you so much.
I just have one observation. The grid going down is a problem in many of the hazards, and getting generators to the appropriate places is a part of that. But recent events around our country just has shown that sometimes grids can go down for a long time, and maybe with today's technology, the combination of solar charging and battery storage might be useful for us to sort of have some of that in our city and as a part of our hazard mitigation strategy. Just to have, you know, if we had a longer term than 4 days, a solar to battery charging system would allow for more long-term power to our city where we need it. So that's just something I thought maybe we should rethink, given that these bigger batteries are coming down in price and the price of solar charging is coming down. It might be a reasonable thing to balance out these kinds of generators with, in effect, microgrids being something for safety.
I know microgrids is part of one of the long-range
Yeah,
mitigation strategies, and so it is something we definitely can look into.
My only item was similar to Diane's, which was whether we had information from private entities that including things like AC Transit with hydrogen fuel storage and valves, and a lot of the lab research space in the city uses flammable and combustible fluids and gases, and so I'm just wondering if we have information and that's managed in the report.
So I know that, I believe that fire has that information. Because we did inquire, there is information about how many labs we have in the city in the plan, but it's not for public knowledge what is being used in those labs.
Right.
But fire does have that information. At least that's what I was assured.
So is there a non-public way of us updating that confirms that for security reasons?
We can
We can
definitely
ask
look into it.
about
Yes, we
Okay.
can ask.
That's it. Thank you.
Actually, I have one more question. I know that there's a section related to terrorism and there's a section related to cyber terrorism, but I'm wondering if active shooter scenarios came up in the process and if they were downgraded or if they just never came up at all.
They did not come up as being a hazard. They did not come up. That did not come up.
You think they could be terrorism?
They're not always, I mean, terrorism has a definition
Mm-hmm.
of using fear and intimidation to overpower folks. And, you know, the lone gunmen are often not considered terrorists by that definition, like the one in Texas, in Sutherland.
I think she asked a good question. I would like to see that reviewed.
An active shooter
Active
scenario.
shooter.
Added into the plan?
Is there time now? Well, that's a good question. Is there time to add anything into this plan, or is there time to start considering what would be going into the next version of the plan?
I mean, we could be both, or we could also look where that kind of a plan would be better suited to sit, as opposed in the local hazard mitigation plan. It may be something like the chief might want to talk about, like that the police department would have a plan for that.
Yeah, so we train to that. I'm not sure that it belongs in the emergency, in the hazard mitigation plan.
local
That's sort of
hazard
more of a
mitigation plan.
global focus. A response to active shooter is more of an operational plan, department specific.
Mayor Donahue, if I could just chime in. The focus of this plan is on FEMA and FEMA-funded recovery from disasters. So I'm not sure that active shooter scenario would fit into something that FEMA would respond to.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've gotten the presentation a couple of times at different committees. I just want to thank you for all the hard work
Thank
you
you.
put into this.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Chief Tejada, who's going to introduce the next presentation.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you tonight Susan Christensen, who is going to share with you the status of our gap analysis on emergency preparedness and services for the city of Novato. This was prompted.
Emeryville.
Oh, jeez. We're just talking about Novato, so Emeryville. And this was prompted by a meeting that the city manager and I had shortly after I got here, and subsequently City Council in 2016, in that budget year, authorized some money to hire a consultant to do this, because as Councilmember Martinez said, this is beyond the scope of city staff to do something like this. So we identified Ms. Christensen as the best candidate to do this, so I would hand it over to her. Do you have your PowerPoint?
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. Tonight, I will be presenting the findings of the City of Emeryville's emergency management program assessment report, which I developed through coordination with Chief Tejada and Lori Oliphant, who is the city's emergency services coordinator. Specifically, I'll be providing an overview of the report findings, including the recommendations on how the city can continue to build and fortify its emergency management program. So first, I just want to give you a basic overview of what we'll be covering tonight. I'll be going over the background of how the assessment report was developed, what we reviewed, and what we reviewed it against. I'm going to go over the improvement plan, what that is, and what it looks like for the city. And then I'm going to go into some of the key strengths that were identified through the process and the key observations. When I go through the observations, those are essentially the gaps. So we'll go into some of the analyses and recommendations that were discovered through the assessment, and then I'll conclude. So the background of the report, Lori and Chief Tejada mentioned a bit about it. The purpose was to provide a comprehensive picture of the current state of the emergency management plans, policies, and procedures, and to evaluate the current capabilities against national standards. So the assessment was conducted. It began in January and concluded in July. The report is dated July 2017. And the process encompassed several steps. I reviewed, the current and draft emergency plans, local government regulations that were draft or current. I conducted outreach to relevant emergency management stakeholders and conducted some site visits to potential and established emergency management locations. The material that was assessed, this goes into a little bit more detail. It is the Emergency Operations Plan, which was last updated in 2014, the Municipal Code, which I understand has been recently updated, Title IV, Chapter 2, the City of Emeryville Local Hazard Mitigation Plan, which we've just been received a presentation on, the Volunteer Coordination Plan, which was updated in 2014, and then a site visit to the Emergency Operations Center and a few different alternate EOC locations, and also some informational interviews with relevant city personnel to talk about their particular areas of expertise. So the laws and authorities that were used to measure the current status against are listed here. It is a very dense slide, and I apologize for that, but just broad brushstroke, it's essentially local government codes, state government codes like the California Emergency Services Act, et cetera, and federal regulations like the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, the Homeland Security Presidential Directive 5, et cetera. So all of these were reviewed, and the City of Emeryville's emergency program was assessed against those. So the methodology, in addition to assessing it against these federal and local and state standards, there was also a tool that has been nationally recognized that's identified 15 different standards developed from an organization called the Emergency Management Accreditation Program. And this is what I used to develop a program assessment tool to actually go through. It's a document that I went through and systematically assessed each element of an emergency management program against what the city currently has. I'll go into that in more detail in a couple of slides. But essentially, the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, EMAP is the acronym. It is a rigorous industry standard that was developed through a series of working groups with emergency management stakeholders from government, business, other sectors, et cetera. And it's intended to be used as a tool for emergency management programs to strive for continual improvement. So a lot of different jurisdictions use EMAP as a national standard of something to strive to in order to achieve the most current emergency standards. So that's what I used as a basis to conduct this assessment or report. I didn't use all of the standards. I did tailor it specifically to the needs of the city, but it is somewhat in keeping with these standards. So it spans 15 standard categories that you'll see, and it's broken out into isolated areas of emergency management to really break down the different elements of the city's emergency preparedness efforts, and to really be able to analyze them individually. So this is a sample of the, how do I go back? Sorry. Okay, this is a sample of the program assessment tool that I developed. you'll see it's very tiny, but it's just a sample. The full report, I think, is available to you. This one is the Administration and Finance Standard, and you'll see it has up to there's actually up to 6 elements that each standard has. And it goes through, it identifies what the standard is, the authority associated with it, whether it's an EMAP authority, whether it's a federal guideline, et cetera. And then I identified whether that element had been addressed or not addressed. The reference would be the plan or site visit or interview conducted. The assessment information is in the assessment column of my findings of that particular element, and then recommendations, if there were any, are listed on the following column. So the improvement plan, after the assessment tool was filled out, I wrote a more thorough analysis, which is found in the body of the document, of the report, and it highlights all of the recommendations. So the improvement plan was something that is really a roll-up of all of the recommendations in particular, and put into a table. It consolidates the report recommendations into something that is actionable, and it really maps out a path forward for the city to achieve a higher standard. I went through the improvement plan with the chief and with Lori earlier this year when just when the report was being finalized, and went through each recommendation and identified corrective actions or areas that could be improved, specific actions that we wanted to do in order to achieve the standard, and then gave each one a priority ranking of high, medium, and low. And I will be going over the high priority items tonight. And this is a sample of what the improvement plan looks like. The example here is the hazard mitigation standard, and as you can see, it has various recommendations, actions which were identified by city personnel, and they also identified responsible party for who would actually be conducting that corrective action, with a start date and an end date, and then you see the red, yellow, and blue indicating high, medium, or low priority. Essentially, the high ones are the ones that we want to try and complete as soon as possible. The medium ones are ones that we have a little bit more time or are ongoing, and the lower are typically the ones that are kind of ongoing things. So now I'm going to go into the key strengths. If you have any questions, please stop me. So the key strengths that were found, I'm going to organize them by standard. So standards 2 and 3 are stakeholder input and laws and authorities. So these were definitely strengths for the city of Emeryville. In the Muni Code, Chapter 2 of Title 4, there is a designation of a disaster council, which I know is new, but that's definitely a strength because that checks the box for the stakeholder input portion, which is very important in an emergency management program. You really want to have stakeholder input on various items that are being conducted in the emergency management program. So that's definitely a positive. And for laws and authorities, Standard 3, there are legal statutes and regulations that establish the authority for the emergency management program within the Muni Code. The hazard mitigation plan is a big strength for the city as well. Lori did an excellent job of updating and really reinventing the plan. And as she mentioned, it was developed through a collaborative planning process, and that's really important. You guys had a solid stakeholder group of community representatives, of city representatives, of representatives from other jurisdictions. So that's a really great thing to see. The plan itself identifies and analyzes all of the natural and human-caused hazards that the city is vulnerable to, and I think she did a very good job of incorporating everything that needed to be incorporated. And it also identifies ongoing mitigation opportunities, which really is the crux of any hazard mitigation plan, is identifying those future opportunities that you want to be working toward to continually be improving your mitigation. So key strengths for prevention and communications and warning. These were found through an informational interview that I held with the police department, and it was found that there are numerous prevention communications and warning tools that the city currently uses. AC Alert, which I believe is new, Nixle. The police department is engaged in the See Something, Say Something campaign. They're using the Homeland Security Information Network, or HISN, which is a national standard that many jurisdictions use for prevention information. And the city is also active in using social media for receiving and distributing information. So standard number 7 is planning, and this was a really big piece of the assessment process, really going through all of the different plans and identifying each element within the plan that was identified within the standards. It's a very rigorous process, and as you see, there are lots of different elements that were identified for the standard, and the city really did a good job in incorporating all of these different elements into the plan. It is a lot of bullet points, but essentially it's about the EOC, how it's organized. Is there information within the emergency operations plan that states how the EOC will be conducting activities during an emergency? Is there set procedures for alerting and notifying people, whether it's within the city or its city agencies? Human services are accounted for within the plans, such as mass care and shelter. There are information collection, analysis, and dissemination processes that are identified in the plans. The process for mutual aid is identified within the plans. There's private sector coordination, which is also identified in the plans, and I'm going to go a little bit more into that in just a moment. And resource management and volunteer management also are represented in the plans. So going more into the private sector engagement, I thought this was a really big strength for the city. I had the opportunity last May to go to a meeting with the chief and some key stakeholders from the private sector community, where we talked about city preparedness and private sector engagement. And it seems that the city does have very close relationships with the private sector and is very receptive to input from them. And likewise, the private sector is very engaged and interested in city's emergency preparedness, which I thought was just really, really great. And furthermore, there was a really generous donation from the private sector for the purposes of city preparedness, which I thought was very unique and very excellent to see. So that was definitely a strength. Also, from that meeting, we talked about future collaboration efforts, ways that we could continue to engage the private sector and have future collaboration with them. So a few items that we came up with were to establish a lunch and learn program that business partners could attend, where we could discuss or go through city plans or any kind of city emergency preparedness information that would be relevant to our business partners. I know that Lori is actively engaging private sector partners to look into emergency management resources and storage, whether it's medical equipment or food, things like that, either to store or to potentially use space in the future for emergency purposes. And another recommendation was to revitalize the security coalition between the police department and the security details of the large Emeryville businesses. Another key strength is that the incident management system that has been identified for the city and as outlined in the emergency operations plan aligns with the national and state guidelines, which is the National Incident Management System, or NIMS, and the state one, which is the Standardized Emergency Management System, which is SEMS. The small graphic at the bottom is the organization chart of the city's Emergency Operations Center, and it is in keeping with both the NIMS and SEMS guidelines. So more key strengths, standard 9 and 10, which is resource management and logistics and mutual aid. We covered this a little bit already, but both in the EOP and in the volunteer coordination plan, they both go into a good amount of detail about how resources are going to be managed, logistics are going to be taken care of, and how mutual aid is going to be requested up to other sectors of government. Another key strength was on my site visit to the EOC. I went through and saw that they had a lot of really excellent equipment for activating at any time. The city would definitely be able to activate and respond to any kind of emergency. You have laptops, you have phones, you have internet connectivity. There are bins for each section with information inside for different forms that would need to be filled out for FEMA reimbursement. So that was definitely a big positive. There's been a lot of work done in the EOC, and I thought that was a really great strength for the city. And then finally, the public information and education piece. The city is actively engaged in getting its residents to participate in emergency preparedness activities through community events and through hosting preparedness information on the city's website. So some of the key observations. The first one is from the standard number 1, which is administration and finance. And this one focuses a little bit more on the administration. So based on my experience and on national standards, it's advisable to have a dedicated emergency management coordinator or emergency services coordinator that has primary responsibility to oversee this kind of a program. It's a pretty big job, and currently it's my understanding that the city only has a part-time staff who is working on these various plans and the program overall, and it would definitely be a huge benefit to the city if there was some way that more time could be allocated to this particular position, or if another position could be made available to assist with that position, or something like that would be very beneficial to the city, so that there's more time that's able to be put forth toward this effort. So the standard 1, we're still on that one, but this focuses a little bit more on the finance portion of it. Effective emergency management programs have financial and administrative procedures that are in place for before, during, and after an emergency. The city does have very solid financial plans and procedures for day-to-day activities, but it would definitely be recommended to capture best practices or any procedures that would be anticipated for transitioning from day-to-day to an emergency and then back to day-to-day. Essentially, it would be good to have either procedures or checklists or something like that developed for the finance section within the EOC, so that they have specific items to follow up on. Standard 5 is hazard mitigation. This is more of a strength than anything. So we mentioned already that there was a lot of interjurisdictional input as well as community input into the actual planning process, which was a strength. So the recommendation is really to continue to participate in any kind of preparedness efforts with other jurisdictions in particular. It's really important for a city like Emeryville, who's sandwiched between a lot of different smaller cities that are doing preparedness efforts as well, to be participating in their emergency exercises or planning meetings, things like that, to ensure that emergency actions going on here are complementary with other cities. And I know that that's currently something that's being done, but it's definitely encouraged to continue that. Yes.
Can you go back one slide?
Sure.
So when you say exercises, what does that mean?
Exercise is sort of a term of emergency management art, if you will. It means like a drill or a test of a plan.
So when you say we're already doing it, what do we do? What are we doing specifically?
Well, I believe, have you guys been engaged in exercises recently?
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm talking to Lori. No? Okay, so the recommendation is, I know that Lori has been participating in more of like county level in meetings, engagement in that level, not necessarily exercises, but when exercise opportunities do come up, like if there's a regional exercise of a plan, a regional plan, or a test of that plan, it would be definitely advisable to try and participate in that in some way in the future. And it sounds like, I mean, I don't know if Lori has been able to do that at this point because she is very stretched very thin. So that would definitely be best practice to work towards, is to try and engage on that level.
Thank you.
Sure. Oops. Okay, so going on to prevention. So in the key strengths, I identified that the PD currently uses a lot of different tools, and the city itself uses a lot of different tools for communication, for prevention and just general communication with the public. In order to achieve a higher standard of communicating with the public, or to access more prevention information, the standard identified several different types of equipment that would be helpful for the city to acquire. So this was listed as a recommendation to acquire law enforcement surveillance programs, equipment, incident monitoring systems, such as citywide cameras, unmanned aircraft, or incident management software. Really, acquisition of any of these items would be a benefit to the city. This next analysis and recommendation spans 3 different standards: prevention, planning, and public information and education. And they're really kind of centered around planning. So the emergency operations plan, as I mentioned, is very robust. However, there are lots of elements that are not covered in the plan and typically aren't covered in an emergency plan like this, but are usually found in annexes to the plan. And so a few that were kind of low-hanging fruit that would be very useful to develop for the city as annexes were the critical infrastructure protection plan, a continuity of operations plan, a continuity of government plan, which the COOP and the COG usually go hand in hand, a mass evacuation plan, and a public information plan. Yes.
The mass evacuation plan, which we currently don't seem to have a evacuation versus shelter in place plan, who would be responsible for creating that, and how quickly could that be done? Because that seems high priority.
Yes, that is a high priority that was identified by both the chief and by Lori. And I know that they're working right now to identify somebody to develop that plan as soon as possible. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that.
No, it's definitely a priority, and it's a matter of identifying the resource to carry that out. And it would be different in each sort of commercial area or residential area. Mm-hmm. It would be broken down into specific neighborhoods or business areas. So it's not just a one-time. I guess what I'm saying is it's not just once a year. This would be something we would want to vision doing citywide, but breaking it down into small segments of the city. Yeah.
Okay.
Susan, I have a question. Actually, I think it's 2 slides back.
Okay.
So I noticed in the report that this rose to the level of a high priority, and I just wanted to ask staff what your thoughts are on surveillance programs and equipment.
Are you talking about drones?
Talking about any surveillance programs and equipment.
So, recent exposure to unmanned air surveillance equipment has proven very beneficial in our response to incidents, particularly the fire incident. We had the Alameda County Sheriff's Office came out, and I believe the mayor saw a demonstration of what they were able to achieve using their drone. We had aerial pictures of the fire. There are certain different applications of this drone or abilities, such as detecting whether there's a person in the vicinity, so looking for survivors in a certain area. So it has applications like that. I mean, we haven't done any report on it to be specific about it, but certainly in search and rescue and high-risk incidents, it is an advantage to have that kind of equipment.
Okay, I understand that for disaster and search and rescue. The sentence here reads, acquire law enforcement surveillance programs. So that's really what my question is getting at. What do you envision that meaning?
That's what that would be.
So what you described seemed to be like fire response and disaster response. So law enforcement surveillance programs, that seems to me to sound a little different.
So as I'm reading it, I think in there is also this concept of having some of what we have in place now is partnerships with private industry where they have cameras around their buildings and provide us that information when we're looking for information on incidents that have occurred and people involved, et cetera.
Okay, so I understand that as partnerships, but again, I'm just coming back to acquire law enforcement surveillance programs. So is that just forming partnerships, or are we like, or is this talking about, or is this speaking to acquiring equipment and software? That's my question.
No, I think it speaks to programs because I'm specifically interested in what I call it, commonly referred to in our profession as Citizen View program. So where we partner with either business or residents, they provide us access to their camera system or after the fact access, real-time access, and we can gain some further investigative information from incidents.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
And we do have cameras that we use when we have investigations underway that would benefit from the use of a surveillance camera.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to standard number 11, communications and warning. I mentioned earlier that the city has recently begun to use AC Alert for emergency communications, which is a best practice. But because it's my understanding, at least at the time of the assessment, that it was a relatively new system, that it'd be admonished to continue to train city staff on AC Alert protocols and procedures, and to continue to promote AC Alert within the community through whatever means possible: flyers, Nextdoor, Nixle, community signs, websites, social media, etc. I know that I subscribe to AC Alert in my community, and it's very helpful, especially during the fires. You get lots of information, and I ended up passing a lot of that information on to friends, and none of the people that I knew had ever heard of AC Alert. So it's really a great tool, and I definitely recommend that you guys continue to try and push it out to the community. Standard 12, the EOC. So as I mentioned, the EOC does have the basic equipment and resources to respond effectively to an emergency situation. However, there was a report that I also conducted back in January that highlights really the baseline for what you want in an EOC, and then things that would be nice to have in order to operate a little bit more smoothly. And from that report, which I shared with Chief Tejada and Lori Oliphant, it identifies a few recommendations for ways to continually improve the EOC over the next few years, different items that would be helpful to acquire in order to make it a little bit more efficient. So that would definitely be a recommendation, to continue to review the requirements report and update the EOC accordingly. There is currently no alternate EOC, as it's my understanding. Back when we did a few assessments earlier this year, there were a few different locations that seemed like they could be solid options, but nothing really was completely perfect. At some point, it would be definitely a benefit to the city to have a designated alternate EOC in the event that there is something that happens and the primary is inaccessible. You do want to have something that is set as an alternate with information and equipment and things like that that are already stationed there, so you're not trying to bring everything over from offices and things like that. So that is definitely a recommendation. And then another one is to obtain a Cal EOC account through the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal EOS. And this is a software program that the state uses and then has also issued to numerous jurisdictions throughout the state to kind of try and keep it all consistent as far as information sharing and resource requests, mutual aid requests, things like that. And in addition to it being a benefit to the city for communicating up to the county and state level, it's also really helpful at a local level to gain situational awareness from like boots on the ground folks and getting situational updates from what's actually happening within the city up to the EOC. So that's something that I would recommend to try and incorporate. Standard 13 and 14 are training and exercises, and those two typically go hand in hand. Here's exercises again. So currently there is no dedicated schedule for emergency management training and exercises, in spite of the best efforts of the emergency services coordinator. I know she worked really hard to get some on the schedule last year that fell through, unfortunately. But that is something that would be a huge benefit to the city, because you really can't know that your plans are going to work unless you practice the plans and you train to the plans and you identify where the areas for improvement are after you've tested and trained to them. You don't want to be having a huge disaster occur and that be the first time that most of the people in an EOC are opening the plan and trying to figure out what their responsibilities are. So this is all a part of a big program that would be really great for the city to incorporate. A multi-year training and exercise plan is what I would recommend. Typically that's with a committee, a dedicated committee that meets annually and goes through trainings that they would want to have over the next 1 to 3 years, exercises that you want to build toward over a multi-year period, and then actually sitting down and scheduling those. So going a little bit further, into the exercises. So following an exercise, typically an after-action report is developed, which captures improvement items and strengths and areas for improvement. And this is something that I would recommend once you do start this program of doing exercises to also write after-action reports that identify things like improving plans or improving trainings or things like that. And I also would recommend including this process into real-world events. Even if you don't have an EOC activation, I know that you guys have recently had some incidents such as fires, anything that really where more than one agency is involved, like if you have a fire and police event, something like that, would be a great opportunity to come together after the fact and talk through the incident, identify key strengths, areas for improvements, and capture those so that they're actually documented and you have some kind of a recourse for building from that incident. So to reiterate, I would state I would recommend to also incorporate after-action reports into real life incidents. And then moving one step beyond that, once you do start this process of of after-action reports and improvement plans, to create a master improvement plan where everything from exercises and real-world events is captured in a database where you can go back and you can look through and actually follow up on the different items that have been identified as improvement actions, so you can close the loop on a lot of those things. So in conclusion, I think that the city has done a really excellent job considering its resources in developing an emergency management program. I'm very impressed with how robust it actually is for how small amount of staff hours have been able to be dedicated to it. You guys have excellent plans and resources, an excellent EOC, but there are definitely some areas where you guys could improve. I would recommend continuing to pursue the goal of developing a robust and sustainable emergency management program. And through using this assessment report that I've developed, using the high, medium, and low priorities, you can really map out a good plan for what an emergency coordinator could be doing with their time over the next 5 years plus to get the emergency management program up. And then the final recommendation really is to try and get more, if possible, more staff hours dedicated to an emergency services coordinator position to actually carry out all of these responsibilities, because it is a big job and it does require some dedication. So that is everything. If you have any other questions or comments, I would welcome them.
Maybe we should take some public comments first about this study plan. Okay, seeing none, I have some comments. I mean, I'm impressed with the plan, but I'm also would like to know whether you think that, yes, we're a small city, but are we more complex than other cities? And therefore, we're at greater risk because of the nature of our city and all its specifics.
Yeah, the city is very interesting because it's a small city geographically speaking, but you have big city problems because you have a lot of really big you just have a lot of really big city issues. You have transportation, you have a lot of big private sector agencies, you have, I mean, I don't know, you just got a lot of really complex issues. So I definitely agree that that it is a very unique city and a unique problem for emergency management. But to that point, I think it's even more important to have a dedicated position or, staff that is allocated to working towards solving those problems and writing plans and testing those plans and such, and making sure that the city stays on track to continually prepare for incidents.
Do you think that the bigger cities around us who might have full-time staff are better prepared than we are in their training and other aspects of their programs, or are we equally well prepared or equally not as prepared as they are?
I can't speak for cities like Berkeley and Oakland. I haven't worked exclusively with either of them, so I don't know exactly what their preparedness level is. I do know that they do have dedicated emergency staff that are working, multiple staff that are working full-time to write plans and exercise plans and do community outreach and things like that. So in some capacities, perhaps they may be more better postured to respond to an incident, or maybe more of the city personnel that might be involved in an EOC might be more prepared. But I think that given what has currently been developed in your city, I think that if something were to happen tomorrow, you would be fine using what you have. That being said, there's always room for improvement, and there's never too soon of a time to start.
Thank you.
I have some comments. So this is a really important issue, and I appreciate all the time staff put into putting this together, because this is, to me, the first step of what we need to do. I don't think I disagree with your last comment. I think I would expand upon what you said. I think cities are overwhelmingly underprepared. The best plan in the best binder doesn't mean the best execution. And I've had the experience as a former disaster relief director of going to many different cities, and I have yet to go to a city that was prepared for a disaster. But the ones that were the closest to being prepared were the ones that practiced, which is why I had a question about exercises. Mm-hmm. And so for me, the investment in this analysis and this report, which, thank you, Lori, I know how much you've done on this, is really important, but it is incomplete in two ways. One, if it's not practiced and tested, we can't make it better, right? And the other thing is that from practicing it and testing it, that's where we actually learn where the real gaps are. You've identified a number of the obvious ones tonight, mm-hmm. but as you noted, this is a very complex little city, and it will have a lot of other gaps that will come up when we've actually drilled, tested, and exercised this.
Yeah.
So, the couple other observations I would just make are, if we had an earthquake here at 1 in the morning, we have about 12,000 residents. I'm sure you have some night staff in buildings security. But if we had a, earthquake at 1 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, you have potentially 30 to 45,000 people working here, an unknown number of people on roads and freeways, and many shoppers and other people who are not regular daily people here. And as great as our fire department and police department are, we do not have the resources to adequately respond and triage completely the emergency response that is typically allocated for the first 72 hours of a disaster. This city would most likely be in a 2-week period before it was adequately served. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to do two things. One, other than doing disaster training and exercises, I think one is we really need to, as we go and look at training, really bring in all of the private sector. These are folks who do not know the streets and the exit routes to Emeryville like residents do. In fact, it's actually a very complicated city to get around because of mega blocks and streets that don't go places. And so a person who's here for a work day, who's used to getting off at Powell and driving right over the Powell Street Bridge to Novartis, has no idea what lives beyond that. So I really think we really need to convene in partnership with the many large private stakeholders we have in order to plan any training that we would do. And I think that, beyond that, I think we really just need to assess where our investment will be on this. So I would suggest to my colleagues that, this is an excellent first step, and I think you've identified a lot of really good things that we've already done. I think there are some major key things. I heard the mass evacuation plan. That's an excellent piece of the program. But I would just like us to see us increase our investment in training in the next year and preparing for this. And the last thing I'll say is that when the North Bay fires happened, 2 council members in 2 different cities called me, were referred to me by other people. And I had one council member from a city, which I won't mention, on the phone, and she was in shock about what was going on in her community. And she literally said, I feel the need to do something. I've lost my home, and I don't know where to even begin. And so, even though they have a plan. And so, that's why this exercise piece to me, Standard 14, is the most important one, because even with the best printed plan ready to go, if people haven't gone through the experience of this is what happens and how a disaster evolves in real life, it's a very challenging thing to navigate through. So thank you for putting this together, and those are my comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
There was an excellent episode of Parks and Recreation where the city of Pawnee had every single council member participate in an emergency preparedness drill. And their John Bowders, Leslie Knope, became super ill. And so it was incumbent on everybody else to know what to do and make it work. And I for one, think it would be fantastic for our city council and staff to participate in a drill.
I would like a citywide drill.
Yeah.
So my comment would be that since we've elected 3 new members to council, we haven't had an EOC training. So I would request that from staff, that we become acquainted with the EOC, how it operates. And I don't know if Hilda Quiroz is still with, she's not. Whoever would take her place at Alameda County Fire Department would be able to join us and actually brief us on what those steps would be. And later in the evening, we're going to be talking about our standby disaster council, so we could inform those folks as well as to what would need to happen to reconstitute the city council.
Thank you.
I think that your suggestion about modeling particular incidences is a good idea. Like if we train to a particular incident, for example, there's another group called Haywired who are currently modeling a 7.0 earthquake on the Hayward Fault, right up the hill from us. They will have enough information from that we could use for our testing. So we'll know whether I will even be available or any of us will be available with that size of an earthquake, meaning we might be under rubble. You know, we'll see what it is. So like a percentage of the council might be buried under this,
That's why we have to
7.0
have,
right up the hill.
Yeah, diversity of
That's
locations
right. So when
for
we
our standby council.
I mean, it's serious and not serious,
Yeah.
but it could be that if we model to a particular plan, it's a good idea because then we are, thinking in particular, and then that plan may not be that incident might not be the one that happens. But if we do something in specific, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so typically the process or the timeline of events for a preparedness exercise, you do training first, like you mentioned, and then from there you use that knowledge and you would conduct like a tabletop exercise where everybody's sitting down and you talk through either one scenario or a few different scenarios depending on what you want, and you could have something like a small event first, and then you could have the big event where it's 1 p.m. in the daytime on a Wednesday, and then you could have a big event when it's 1 a.m. on a Saturday, and you can talk through some of the different unique aspects of a response to those different situations, and then you can tweak plans and such after that, and then you would go on to do either what they call a functional or a full-scale exercise, where you actually would do an activation of a fake activation of the EOC, and you'd be feeding in information as if it were a real event. You'd have somebody on the phone saying, "This is the information we're getting from the ground. This is PD," and the EOC is actually taking that information and then doing something with it, whether it's communicating it to you guys, pushing it out through public information, et cetera. So you're actually going through the motions of it. So it's all of these points you guys are making are totally valid, and I think that having a training and exercise program and a work group to talk through these priorities that you guys are mentioning right now would be really important. You could actually put those down on a calendar, the training first, tabletop exercise next, functional exercise, and then just build from there.
I just have two other quick things. One, Caltrain is doing a live drill this week. And in fact, they were recruiting folks to be bodies, basically, to paint you up and lay you around a station so that the personnel from the city it's prepared in advance for people arriving. They don't know what they get. It's a live response requirement. So people who are interested, I think it's end of this week. If you want to go volunteer and be a body down in San Jose for Caltrain, you can do that. The other thing I would mention, though, is, Mr. Mayor, if it's of interest to council members, to the point about the tabletop group and creating a timeline to work on this. If there's an interest in an ad hoc committee to follow up on this from council, I would volunteer to be one of the members to do that, if that's of interest to people.
I would volunteer as well. I think it's important for us to have some follow-through and coordinate with Lori and see what we can put together.
I was going to jump on that as well as part of the public safety. I thought it was a nice fit with what we're already doing. So, but I'm happy to refer to you, Mayor.
Thank you for stepping up.
If I may say something.
Yes.
So I think it might sound like we're not actually prepared to respond to an incident, but we are. All of your staff, I served as the emergency preparedness manager for the city of Novato for 3 years. Our fire chief also has extensive training and experience in responding to disasters, as does our public works director. So we are positioned to respond from an operational perspective, and we're all very familiar, including my captain, my staff. We do training in emergency preparedness, and so from that perspective, we know how to stand up. And should a major incident occur, let's say right now, yes, we would be on our own for a very short period of time, but we belong to an operational area. Alameda County is part of that, and we would have mutual aid respond. So I just want to create more of a positive picture, because we do have very skilled staff, experienced staff, and we have resources and relationships with people in place, so it's not all bleak.
Yeah, I would just want to say that for the public, that we know as council people, we are supposed to have a certain role in this, but we are, our role is secondary to our professional staff. And our professional staff are required to be here, as I understand. Even though your own homes and families may be destroyed, you still need to be here. Is that true?
Not entirely.
Yes.
Well, the understanding is that if you reside in another city and you are unable to make it back to the city where you are employed, i.e. Emeryville, then the expectation is that you will participate in these activities in the city where you reside, and to try and get back to the city of Emeryville where you're employed as quickly as you can. Thank you to the police chief. I agree and appreciate everything that Susie has presented. Most of your management team have many years of experience, either here or frankly in other cities. I think I was the EOC director for 7 years prior to coming here. I believe that we do need to conduct exercises, though, here. I've participated in many of them in the past, and also as assurance when it comes to mass evacuations. Those are in the hands of our public safety. Police and fire direct those mass evacuations, and they would do it tomorrow if something should happen. So I agree, we have many great points, and Lori and Susie have done a great job. I do think that we need to go beyond. We have had some tabletop discussions about the role that each of us would have, but I think a full-on exercise, there's no substitute for that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, with that concludes our public study session. Now, I think we have our successor agency.
There's actually tonight a Public Financing Authority brief meeting to approve the debt management policy
Oh, yes.
in yellow.
Okay, I call that meeting to order. I don't think we need a roll call.
Everyone's still here.
Could I have a motion to approve the final agenda for this meeting?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Councilmember Pat, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Is there public comment for the consent agenda for this meeting, or items not on the agenda for this Public Financing Authority special meeting? Mr. Carpio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio, and I'm taking a grip of the Finance Committee here and the City Council for approving the expenditure of $1 million for 4 beds for the shelter of homeless And my first objection is that if there should be a priority, it should be for the woman homeless, not the man homeless. And that has not been discussed. The presenters say that first they want to deal with the man, and I disagree. The women are far more desperate as homeless than men. They cannot go around and steal and sell what they get, while the man can always manage to have hard stuff. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are investing $1 million in real estate in another city. You should invest this $1 million in a city of Emeryville so that we'll stay in Emeryville and that eventually will collect tax. And we should have a building that will enrich our city, that we do care for the homeless instead of Berkeley. And that's wrong. I'm appealing that decision, and I want you guys to refuse that. I'm not happy with it, and I will present a petition for people to sign that we are squandering $1 million in another city that should be ours, and we are only really behind as far as the homeless situation. We just think about it. That's really bad. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Okay, let's proceed with this. Is there a presentation with this?
No, it's a consent
Move
calendar
the
item.
consent calendar.
Okay.
Second.
Was that Vice Mayor Bowders and the second?
Medina.
I heard two. Okay. Moved by Vice Mayor Bowders, seconded by Councilmember Pats. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Okay, now we go to the successor agency meeting. We need an approval of the final agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second?
Moved by Councilmember Medina, seconded by Councilmember Martinez. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Public comment for the consent agenda or items not on the agenda. Mr. Carpio.
I want to take an issue about the safety preparedness for so-called earthquake and whatever disaster. In 1987, we had an earthquake here, and one span of the Bay Bridge snapped. And it was due because the motion of the wave from the St. Andrea Falls, which is west, which is northwest, has been colliding, and as a result of the mass in movement, something had to snap, and the rivet gave away, and the fan dropped. So, based on that, if we go to accident, car accident, vehicle accident, the first thing we do when we have a situation like that, we do accident reconstruction. Nothing has been previewed about that. So, in 1997, 10 years later, I just happened to have a conversation with Governor Schwarzenegger, and I was telling him that I had made an earthquake simulating machine. It's a contraption that copies past earthquake. And with that, we make an analysis of the event of past space magnetism. I want to remind you that the Earth's surface is like a pellicle on a tomato. It's very thin, and it appears to be very hard because we sit on it. But actually, on a space situation and proportion, it's extremely soft. And to give you an example, in my basement, which my house is supposed to collapse, no, in my well, the ground has descended a quarter of an inch probably from the last earthquake. So we cannot say that the earth is rising or the earth is coming down. The earth is waving, and the reason it's waving, the only way to predict that is to have an earthquake simulating machine in which we can match past event and past space magnetism that we can measure with the space program. We have enough satellite there to measure, sample, and make data to be very precise of what happened. The space magnetism is so strong, we have the tide every so often, just by the magnetism of the moon. So this is an example, but there is many other. Thank you.
Move the consent.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Pat, seconded by Vice Mayor Bowders. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. That concludes the successor agency meeting, and we are on to the regular city council meeting.
Aye.
I, Diane Martinez,
solemnly
pledge
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California as I discharge my duties as City Council Member for the City of Emeryville. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Second to last time.
Okay, I don't think we need a roll call. Do we have an approval of the final agenda, the way it is right now?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Councilmember Pats, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. We have a special order of the day, a recognition of Employee of the Quarter.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is one of the favorite things about my job. Tonight I get to introduce the Employee of the Quarter, and tonight we will be bringing up Emmy Theriot. You have notes to read about her. Her plaque. Oh, Charlie, okay. Both of us.
On behalf of the City Council and the staff of Emeryville, I am proud to award the Community and Economic Development Coordinator, Emmy Theriot, the Employee of the Quarter Award for the third quarter of 2017. Emmy began her career at the City of Emeryville in 2016 and quickly established herself as a key member of the Economic Development and Housing team. Specifically, Emmy was instrumental in the drive to become a state-designated cultural arts district, a competitive process that involves significant data collection, interface with key partners and stakeholders, and coordination of several community meetings. Emmy's tenacity and professionalism resulted in the city being awarded the designation of the Rotten City Cultural Arts District. Emmy has a knack for community outreach and event coordination that has been demonstrated in the resounding success of the Small Business Joint Study Session, which was attended by over 80 individuals involved in Emeryville's small business community. In addition, Emmy has worked to implement the small business programs, including the business license and fire inspection fee rebate program, and the Facade Improvement Grant Program. Finally, Emmy has led the city's participation in the Bay Area Urban Manufacturing Initiative, ensuring the city's business incentives are included on the State of California Business Incentive Gateway web tool, and has become oriented to the city's Art Center project to prepare for the kickoff of this project in 2018. According to her co-workers, Emmy makes everything she does look beautiful, which is an activity guide article, a request for proposals, or an event invitation. Emmy is organized and responsive, which is an impressive combination. She continues to raise the bar on professionalism for the city of Emeryville. As part of this Employee Recognition Award, Emmy is being presented an award plaque and a gift certificate to an Emeryville restaurant of her choice. She will also have her picture prominently displayed in City Hall and will be taken out to lunch by the city manager, Carolyn Lair, and the community development director, Charlie Bryant. May I hand this to you, Emmy?
Congratulations, Emmy.
Congrats, Ms. Thoreau.
Congratulations. Do that one slowly so I can get a picture.
Thank you. You've got a great team here, and I've really enjoyed the work I've done here, and I hope to continue, and that the Cultural Arts District and all the amazing ramifications of that designation will move on with the city.
Thank you, Emmy.
Thank you, Emmy. Announcement of commission and committee vacancies.
Searching for my notes here. So as council knows, we just have the one vacancy that I've announced a couple of times before. Last time we spoke about it, council wanted a little follow-up on just what was possible to be done with the composition of the Public Art Committee. So I looked that up in the meantime. And what your resolution says is that you can have up to 9 members, and that it should be made up of residents and business representatives, but it's not specific to numbers of each. So the vacancy that we had was in the business representative category, which is why we advertised it as such. But there's nothing to preclude you, if you desired to appoint somebody who is not in business. However, since we last talked about this, there's been another application filed. So you'll have 2 folks to choose from, and you'll see their applications and information in your packet for the December 5th meeting, which is when you'll make the appointment.
Thank you. Public comment for the consent agenda or items not on the agenda.
Oh. Mr. Mayor, were there any council member special announcements?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I skipped that.
Nope.
So I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but I just want to take a moment here and thank Pedro for coming out to my school and recruiting at my school for bringing our kids into community service programs, and it was a really wonderful presentation. So I'm just going to take this moment to thank him and to appreciate his department, and some leads were generated, and so I'm really excited by this potential collaboration.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. Okay, any other public comment on the consent agenda or items not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, city manager's report.
Couple of items this evening, Mr. Mayor. Amber Evans of Community Development would like me to make a couple of announcements. The first one is that the city will be sponsoring 2 parking management workshops at ECCL on November 16th. The public is invited to attend, and on the 16th there will be 2 sessions. One will start at 3 p.m. And the second one will start at 6 p.m., and the public is free to choose whichever is convenient. RSVPs are appreciated, and you will see information like this that you see on this flyer on the city's website. But the public is encouraged to attend to provide valuable insight to inform this project as we plan a citywide parking management plan. Also, Emmy would, I'm sorry, not Emmy, but Amber would also like me to announce that the Art Purchase Award celebration at City Hall will be taking place on December 7th at 5:30. That's for the art that is being displayed here at City Hall. And then there's also art that will be presented at the Senior Center, and that is on December 13th at 6 p.m. The last item is that, you know, the city and the city council and staff worked on a more involved process, I think, to approve this last budget for so that for the first quarter that we are ending September 30th, 2017, the thing I wanted to do is to try and give you a brief update on how we were performing to that budget. And you might recall that the fiscal year budget for the general plan 17-18 is a total of $40.3 million. And the general fund revenues for the first quarter totaled $6.5 million. Based on our quarterly projection for this quarter, this is in line with our budget projection. Sales tax advances for July and August are tracking slightly below last year. We continue to keep a watchful eye on our sales tax. General fund expenditures for the first quarter total $9.9 million. Year-to-date expenditures are within budget, and the increase in personnel cost in what we anticipated to be normal increases for salaries and benefits have already been incorporated into that figure. So these are also in line. And overall, the first quarter expenditures are consistent with the budget. The staff in February of 2018 does plan to present a mid-year budget update, and there we will be providing any suggestions for or modifications to the figures based on up-to-date information at that time. But mid-year is really where we look at any modifications. And I think that that concludes my presentation. It's not really intended to be any sort of an in-depth report, but just a quick overview. And certainly when it comes to the mid-year budget report, we expect to have quite a bit more discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
May I ask a question about this? Carolyn, is staff tracking real estate transfer taxes and transactions that would affect that, and whether or not those are in line with our expectations?
I am aware that we may be anticipating some activity in real estate transfer. I don't think I'm at liberty to discuss this at this time. I don't think I have the particulars.
I've seen some news.
Yes. So
I'd love to get an update on that.
Yes, we are hopeful in that. My guess is that when we are certain about that information, that there will be a notice that goes out with some specificity to all of the council members. This is the kind of very brief update that we hope to provide every month, regardless of the quarterly reports.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, ex parte communications about items on the consent calendar or the regular agenda items.
Nope.
Okay. Do I have a motion for the consent items?
I'll move consent.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Medina, seconded by Councilmember Pats. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. We have a public hearing. Resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville approving a conditional use permit and design review permit for the Doyle Street Mews involving the demolition of 4 existing legal residential units and 2 existing illegal residential units.
Assistant Planner DeVar Oaks will be making this presentation.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'll just be taking a few moments to get set up here. I do have a materials board for the presentation tonight. It is the same materials board that you saw last time. I do have it here. As last time, it's quite heavy, so it's not really great to pass it around, but if you'd like to see it up close, I'd be happy to bring it up to you, so just let me know. So, as mentioned, I'll be presenting on Doyle Street Mews. The applicant, the architect, as well as the city consulting arborist are all here tonight as well if you have any questions for them. So the project location is on Doyle Street, just south of 59th Street. As mentioned, it's demolishing of existing units, replacing with 6 new units. All units have 3 bedrooms, 1 parking space per unit for a vehicle, and then bicycle parking as well. In unit plus 4 guest spaces. So here's a photo of the existing site, and then here's the proposed structures. So for background, the application was originally submitted in March of 2016 and requires major design review and city council, as well as a use permit and city council approval because of the demolishing of existing residential units. So whenever we demolish existing residential units in Emeryville, that requires planning commission recommendation and city council approval. The first Planning Commission study session was in April of 2016. There was general support for the project. There were some questions about how the applicant was trying to obtain bonus points at that time. Feedback was provided on that, and concerns were raised by the neighbors. A resident spoke, and then neighbors to the north discussed potential impacts to redwood trees that were adjacent to the subject property. At the second Planning Commission meeting in August of 2016, the bonus point proposal was changed in regard to the feedback that was given, and it was decided to provide bonus points that the bonus points would come from the citywide fund to support small local serving businesses as well as family-friendly units for all of the units. A tree assessment was provided by the city arborist, and the Planning Commission was supportive of the new bonus point structure and provided additional design feedback. So then it came to the City Council for the first time in November of 2016, where the council was generally supportive and identified 2 major issues, overall design materials and the preservation of the redwood tree that I mentioned before, and deferred how to deal with those items back to the Planning Commission. So after that City Council study session, the applicant hired a new architecture firm and modified a lot of features of the project. Then the project came back to the Planning Commission for a study session this July in 2017. There, the commissioners expressed support for the project and appreciated that all the revisions that had been made, and the commissioners provided some suggestions on building materials and design, and also the ground floor facade. After that Planning Commission study session, there were some minor changes made to the parking lot, or to the parking plan overall, pardon me. More family-friendly design features were incorporated, verification of the total floor area to make sure it was compliant with our floor area ratio maximums, and windows were added and plantings to address the concerns about the ground floor facade. So very recently, as you may remember, this came to City Council in September for a study session where there was a lot of discussion about the character and the scale of the project and context of the neighborhood. We're directed, or the conditions of approval to it include provisions to protect all of the trees. And so the conditions of approval tonight do have requirements for both pre-demolition and pre-building permit meetings with the applicant, the chief building official, and the city consulting arborist. Additionally, the conditions of approval require the development of a tree protection plan to be reviewed, approved, and enforced by the city consulting arborist and community development director. And the purpose of the tree protection plan is to preserve and protect all elements of the existing trees, so roots and branches that extend onto the project site. Also, City Council inquired in September about the possibility of obtaining 50 of the required bonus points by providing affordable housing units. So we looked into this, of course, and the assessment was that it's not feasible. 10 bonus points are provided for every 1% of project construction valuation, and 50 points requires 5% of project construction valuation. This project is estimated to have 5% of the construction valuation to be about $125,000. The cost to provide an affordable unit at 8% area median income is approximately $633,000, and the cost to provide 120% affordable medium income, medium income unit is approximately $406,000. So that far exceeds the construction valuation. So the proposal for it to be 50 points from family-friendly units and 50 points to the small business fund that is maintained. So this went to Planning Commission for public hearing on September 28th, and changes that occurred after you saw the project and before it went to City Council for their recommendation, or some bike parking dimensions were revised to make sure that they met all dimensional requirements. A sheet was added to show the tree root protection zones on the plans, and then also an elevation of Doyle Street showing the proposed buildings in context with the adjacent buildings. No public comment was provided at that meeting, and the commission voted unanimously to recommend that City Council approve the project. So I'm going to walk you through the plan a little bit again. Here's the parking plan that I mentioned changed a little bit. If you follow my cursor, there were previously 4 it was a total of 8 spaces, 4 racks in the back here. That was reduced to 2 racks for 4 parking spaces to provide adequate circulation and enough space for larger bikes such as cargo bikes or trailers. And the type of bike parking was revised that was inside to make it more compatible with each of the units. Here is the tree protection shown here. And this represents the estimated tree root zone. To kind of highlight here, the primary root protection zone here where it's can affect the stability of the actual tree overlaps with one of the units here. And then the other 2 units are in the greater area, but not within that primary zone. You can see the other trees are outside of any of the building areas. So here's the elevation I mentioned. So it shows scaled how the new buildings look in context with the existing. And then the renderings along Doyle Street. So this would be facing slightly south, looking at the north building, and the opposite direction. So the site plan itself has not changed from the last time you've seen this. And trash enclosures are at the front of the property in conformance with Alameda County, or not Alameda, well, Alameda County, yes, requirements, as well as waste management, and in consultation with our Public Works Department. And here's just a close-up of that showing capacity. Landscaping, no changes since you've last seen the project. It meets all of our water-efficient landscaping ordinance requirements. And so here's a rendering from the front of Doyle. Here's from the back, so what you'd see from the rear. The north facade, the south facade, and this would be the central driveway facing north, and the central driveway facing south. So the buildings aren't exact mirrors of each other, but they speak to each other. And then here we are a little bit further back of view from Doyle Street. And then here we are going between the 2 buildings. And then a rendering from the rear. But this shows 4 bike racks, but it's 2 as I mentioned. So family-friendly design guidelines in units 1 and 4 are shown here. It's hard to see on the big screen, but each of these little red bits of writing here indicates which design guideline this area corresponds with. And same for units 2 and 5 and units 3 and 6. So for general plan, this is part of the area of stability. Its land use classification is mixed use with residential, where a mix of use is not required because it's less than 1 acre. And the transit hub or hub overlay touches the property, but it doesn't apply because it's not the majority of the property. So there's not a parking reduction with that. And it's also under the North Hollis overlay zone, which impacts the setbacks on this project a little bit. So the area of stability is an area of stability are those parts of the city that are not anticipated to change significantly in character, land use, or development intensity over the next 20 years. Demolition of existing buildings and construction of new buildings are not prohibited in areas of stability. It is likely that a new development project in an area of stability might result in demolition of existing residential units, and demolition of existing residential units always requires City Council approval, as we already discussed. So the proposed Oil Street Mews project is consistent with the character, land use, and development intensity of the area, and therefore conforms to the general plan designation of this neighborhood as an area of stability. So here's a map of that, as we talked about, in a little red circle approximately where this project is. And then a map of the general plan with the mixed-use residential. Once again, you can see that the transit hub overlay just touches the front, but doesn't really cover the property. And then the North Hollis overlay map. So for zoning, it's consistent with the general plan, mixed use with residential. Multi-unit residential is permitted in this zone. And as I mentioned, sites of less than 1 acre, a mix of use is not required. And the North Hollis overlay doesn't modify any of the permitted uses. There we go. So here's the zoning map showing mixed use with residential and the North Hollis overlay zone again. So for zoning analysis, the proposed project is 1.0 FAR, which is the maximum amount of FAR, requires a bonus. The residential density is proposed to be 6 units. It could be between 5 units and 8 units with a bonus. And then the building height is at 30 feet, which is the maximum. So for off-street parking, 1 space per unit plus 0.2 spaces for guests. So it's 7.2 spaces of estimated demand, but we have a permitted parking range. So anything between 5 and 8 spaces is permitted. The applicant is proposing 1 space per unit. And then bicycle parking, 7 spaces are required. There's in-unit spaces plus the 4 guest parking spaces, so that's exceeded. For setbacks, the MUR zone requires no side or front setbacks and a 10-foot rear setback because it abuts a medium residential zone. All of those are exceeded, as well as the North Hollis overlay zone requirement of 15 feet of landscaping and sidewalk from the face of curb to the building face. For open space, there is a 40 square foot minimum of private open space per unit and 20 square feet of common open space per unit. Both of those are exceeded substantially. For landscaping, there needs to be at least 10% of the site area for landscaping. This is more than double that. And street trees and utility wires, there are currently no street trees in front of these properties, and the conditions of approval require street trees every 25 feet, so about 4, and a minimum of 3.5 foot of planting strip to facilitate root growth for those street trees, and the undergrounding of all utilities as well. So for the community benefit options, as we mentioned before, the applicant has chosen additional family-friendly units and small businesses. And you get 50% or 50 bonus points in this case from both of those. And the required findings for the project are for the conditional use permit, the development bonuses, the demolition of residential units, and design review. The staff feels that all of these findings can be made, and the Planning Commission also recommended the approval of these findings, that the project is consistent with the general plan, and the characters and the design of the proposed use are compatible with the neighborhood, and the proposed use is compatible with utilities and emergency response systems. And the proposed use contributes to the general well-being of the community and complies with the planning regulations. So those are the conditional use permit findings. For the development bonus, for the MUR, the project will provide community benefits sufficient to earn the number of points required. We've discussed how they're meeting those. And the proposed community benefits are significant and clearly beyond what would otherwise be required, which is true. For development bonus findings, the third one that's required is proposed community benefit for the project is acceptable and appropriate in this case and will provide tangible community benefits. So providing the family-friendly units, as we know, there's a disproportionate number of studio and one-bedroom units in the city. Demo of residential unit findings. The applicant will provide at least the same number of dwelling units as the demolished structures, so there's a total of 6 now, proposed is 6, and the replacement structure would feature design quality that is high or is higher than the structures to be demolished, and that it's compatible with the character of the neighborhood. So by providing larger family-friendly units and exceeding landscaping, open space, and bicycle parking standards, the replacement structures feature design quality that is higher than the existing structures. And the elimination of the residential structure would not be material detrimental. They're replacing all the units with 3-bedroom family-friendly units. For major design review, the project is again consistent with the general plan. The design of the project is also in conformance with the Emeryville design guidelines. And the project, as I said, is of high design quality. The Planning Commission and staff recommend that the City Council adopt the resolution and approve the Doyle Street Muse project. And as I said, the applicant, the architect, and the city arborist are all available.
Clarifying questions? Public comment. Mr. Carpio.
I assume that means you are opening the public hearing.
Yes, I'm opening the public hearing.
Thank you.
Again, I did not see anything that has a benefit for the environment. There is no mention of any solar panel installation. There is no adaptation for wind turbine. There is no, and the last one is that I don't see any space saving. There is no underground parking. So valuable land are being killed for the parking off-street, the off-street parking. And I mean, I really do not think that the sea level will flood the area to prevent underground parking. So in other words, here again, we have off-street parking, but there is no area for personal storage. And so everybody rent a place and then automatically they have to look some places to store their stuff instead of having it on the ground or on the side of the building. And that I think is it's a defect. I don't know. I'm not part of the Planning Commission, so, and I sure do not want to usurpate their role. But I think that here there is something that has been missing, is that as far as energy conservation and production, this has been completely escaped. And then as far as serving the parking people, when you park outside of off-street parking, then you are getting to be vulnerable. People will steal, people will scratch, you're subject to whatever. And so here, although the off-street parking seems to be elegant and within the approval of the city, to me is still inadequate. We just do not have enough space to store our stuff. And I'm not talking about stuff about books and things like that. No, I'm talking about excess furniture, something that is temporary, out of order, that you need to put, you just cannot throw it away, leave it on the sidewalk, hoping somebody will take it. You know, that doesn't work like that. You know, we are in an area where we are modernized and we need space. In the old time, we had space around the house and all that, but now we are being restricted, and that's not good. And the last item I want to put here is that the roofing, I do not see in aerodynamics that is made on the roofing. If we have a strong wind, a hurricane, all these roofs are going to peel off, and that's unacceptable. Thank you.
Any further public comment? I have a question.
You have to close the public hearing.
Okay, I close the public hearing. I have a question. Is the roof capable, in this, what I assume is a condo association, of having solar panels on the roof and having power distributed?
The applicant can respond to that.
So projects like this will conform with the green building codes from the state that follow through to Emeryville. And I'm unsure if Emeryville has any elevated standards for solar panels for installation, but there will be definitely solar-ready zones called out for on the roof that relate to the building type. And I think the state code now calls for conduit and infrastructure to be installed, and then the applicant or a building owner can install their own system in the future. And there might be something we'll coordinate with the building department and the city staff to see if there's any other required installation that is currently in the code books. So we'll meet those standards.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments?
I just want to thank Director Bryant, and I want to thank everybody on the Planning Commission who put a lot of time into this project, had quite a number of study sessions. I want to thank the neighbors who participated. Your input is valuable, and you helped make this a better project, both aesthetically and to the protection of the trees that surround it. And I want to thank the applicant for hiring a new architect and for working with staff to ensure that the Coast Redwood, which is a beautiful tree in that neighborhood, is preserved. Thank you. I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowder, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Okay, action items. 12.1. Consideration of the installation of flexible bollards on Horton Street as a pilot project.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Okay. We're just going to call up the PowerPoint here, but while Ryan's doing that, I'll give you a brief idea of what we're up to. The City Council requested that staff review the possibility of installing flexible bollards as a means of improving bicycle safety on Horton Street between 53rd and 59th Street. In response, we reviewed the existing conditions and concerns, analyzed the crash data, and assessed the practicality, installation cost, and maintenance requirements. Based on our review, staff identified a number of options for council to consider and recommends a pilot project to install flexible bollards on Horton Street between the Powell Street Bridge and 59th Street. I'm now going to ask Ryan O'Connell, our Public Works Senior Engineer, to walk you through the analysis and provide those recommendations.
Thank you. All right, so yeah, I'm going to discuss best practices and potential use of a separated bikeway here in Emeryville, and specifically 53rd and 59th Street. So bicycle facilities are a vital part of the city's transportation infrastructure that are used by many to travel to and from work or to take trips to other nearby destinations. In 2015, Caltrans and the Federal Highway Administration released design criteria and guidance for Class 4 bikeways, or separated bikeways you can call them. Both documents were prepared to provide design criteria and other general guidance on best practices related to separated bikeways. Separated bikeways, when used, they minimize the interactions with other modes of travel and provide bicyclists with a greater sense of comfort and usability. So the chart shown here shows different types of bicycle lane treatments in order of separation from motor vehicles, from least to most. The key difference between a buffered bike lane and a separated bike lane is that there's an addition of a vertical element helping to separate vehicles from bicyclists. The development of a well-conceived bikeway network that includes separated bikeways can have a positive effect on bicyclist usage, motorist behavior, and community's comfort level on the bikeway network. If we can show that bicycling can be safe, comfortable, and can get you to the majority of your local destinations, it helps us in reducing automobile dependence. So in our bike ped plan that was adopted in 2012, Emeryville defined Horton Street as a bicycle boulevard. Bicycle boulevards are through routes for bicycles, providing continuous access and connections to the local and regional bicycle route network in our area. A bicycle boulevard can be defined as a roadway where local automobile, truck, transit traffic are accommodated in the roadway, but if there are any conflicts, bicycles have the priority. They're the dominant mode of travel on that roadway. So as we were looking at the Horton Street section from 53rd to 59th, we were looking at the common concerns and things that we hear from citizens and from everyone that we hear issues from. So what we've heard is that there's, what we've seen is that there's frequent encroachments by motorists in the bike lanes on all sections in the bike lanes on all sections where there's parking in the red zones. The area is generally assigned with no parking anytime restrictions or red curb markings, and the delivery trucks will often be illegally parked in the red curb areas and they block the bike lanes. Construction signage can also be seen in the bike lanes often, and we're doing some things in our encroachment permit process to prevent that, or to at least have some share the road signs out there on that. In this section of Horton Street, bicyclists encounter multiple conflict points at driveways, parking lanes, and intersecting streets. So general complaints coming from bicyclists is that they don't feel completely comfortable riding on this roadway. So ideally, if we were to put in flexible bollards or other vertical separation elements, we would use the design guidelines set forth by the Federal Highway Administration and Caltrans for separated bikeways. Right here is a diagram or a picture from the Caltrans design guidance, and basically there are sections of Horton Street where design guidelines could be met by using the highlighted minimum dimensions of. This would be a 5-foot bike lane, a 2-foot buffer, and 10-foot travel lanes. Unfortunately, there's many sections of this stretch of Horton Street where it's not going to work as well. Narrow cross sections mean that we can't make these recommended configurations as shown in the guidelines with the buffer. So looking through the street, I'm just going to go through the sections just block by block. 53rd from 53rd to Stamford, you can see on the left picture that it's 11-foot travel lanes, 6-foot bike lanes throughout. We could squeeze down the travel lanes to be 10 feet and fit in a 5-foot bike lane and a 2-foot buffer. But as you go further down on this stretch, you see at the intersection that we have a left turn pocket, and the lanes are already squeezed down to 10 feet. We can no longer squeeze those lanes any further. It's going to be very hard to fit a bollard in there per the guidelines. So on the section from Stamford to Powell Street Bridge, you can see that the travel lanes here are 10 feet and already squeezed down to 10 feet. It's a little bit difficult to fit the bollards in when it's already at 10 feet. As you can see in the second picture, there's also a parking lane at 9 feet on the westerly side. And if we were to put in bollards here, the bicyclists and the cars would have to interact and we'd try to have to space them to where cars could still fit in, and it'd be very tricky. There's many businesses and driveways along this frontage where the parking's at, where drivers are frequently crossing the bike lane. The section from the Powell Street Bridge to 59th Street, this is a section where we can make the bollards work. This is a spot on Horton Street where encroachments are often done by delivery trucks that illegally park at the red curb and block the bike lane. As you can see in this photo, there's construction signage in the bike lane. Further on the picture on the right, you can see a UPS or United States Postal Service van in the lane. And then further on the picture on the left, you can kind of see in the center that there's a driveway interactions that the bicyclists will have to deal with. But this one does have the spacing and the room to fit in per the guidelines, flexible bollards with a buffer. So looking at this section further, we did some collision history analysis on it. Preliminary reviews showed that Horton Street, it shows that there's little to no history to suggest that this street warrants separation of the bike lanes. We ran a 5-year report from 2012 to 2016 with available data that we had. There was 1 vehicle to bicycle accident, 2 vehicle to fixed objects accidents, and then just outside the project area on the 59th Street intersection, just beyond it, there's 1 vehicle to ped accident and 2 vehicle to vehicle collisions. They're shown in Exhibit D of this staff report. The vehicle-to-bicycle collision on Horton Street was on Haruff Street and Horton Street. It was a car turning left onto Horton Street and hitting a bicyclist traveling north on Horton Street. It probably wouldn't be prevented even if we did have the bollards there. It's a driver error. So looking at potential solutions on Horton Street of what we can do there, there are sections of Horton Street where the minimum separated bikeway dimensions can fit using the 5-foot bike lanes, 2-foot buffers, and 10-foot travel lanes. But the problem is that there are many sections where minimum dimensions will not fit. In these areas, the bollards would have to be installed without a buffer, where they would be more at risk and struck by vehicles or bicyclists themselves. So some other factors to consider if we put in some bollards is that the flexible bollards will have to be continually monitored and replaced as they're damaged. There's past cases of bicycle forward-thinking cities like Portland and Long Beach. They've installed these vertical separation elements on pilot projects in locations where they saw a need. They then had to later remove the bollards due to various issues, including continual replacement of the bollards and increased maintenance costs. Another thing to consider is that we have to watch out for debris accumulation in the bike lanes. It creates a dangerous situation to where there could be a big piece of debris in the bike lane, and now a bicyclist has to quickly navigate out to avoid a bollard. They have to do a quick little 90, and now they're in a travel lane where the motor vehicle is not expecting a bike. So it creates some situations like that are a little sketchy. Another thing to consider is that if we have a very narrow separated bikeway, the standard street sweepers used throughout the city would not be able to fit into the proposed bike lane. Any narrow, non-standard sweeper is quoted from vendors as being at least double the normal cost due to the narrow sweeper having to be brought in just for this purpose. So staff has put forward 4 options for council to act on tonight. Option number one is to adopt a resolution to install flexible bollards on Horton Street from 53rd to 59th Street. Option number 2 would be to adopt a resolution to install the flexible bollards from the Powell Street Bridge to 59th Street. Option number 3 is to refer this item to the Transportation Committee for further discussion and review of other potential pilot project locations. As you can see, option number 1, the cost would be approximately $17,500 to install it. Option number 2, $8,000. And then ongoing maintenance for these is expected to be $5,000 to $10,000 per year. At this time, there are no identified funding sources for this project, but one funding option that we could use would be to utilize funds allocated in the CIP for bicycle and pedestrian plan implementation projects. So in conclusion, the flexible bollards proposed will not prevent a speeding driver nor a very determined driver from entering the bike lane. What a separated bikeway would do is help in preventing casual motorists from encroaching into the bike lane and help in promoting a safe path of travel for bicyclists of all skill types. When considering the bollards on Horton Street, council should consider whether Horton Street is the best location to install a separated bikeway in our city. The 5-year crash history on this section of Horton indicates that travel is safe for all roadway users in the existing configuration. Additionally, the existing cross-section of Horton Street make it difficult to implement a proper separated bikeway per federal highway standards and Caltrans standards. With that being said, bollards would work best on the section between Powell Street Bridge and 59th Street. If installed, the project should be given a pilot project status where the bollards would be designed and evaluated based on the FHWA and Caltrans guidelines. Having a pilot project like this would increase the community's comfort level on this section of the bikeway network, and best of all, this project could be used as a case example for other potential locations in the city. So.
I'd be happy to take any questions.
Clarifying questions?
I have one. The cost for the option of 53rd to 59th Street, when you said $17,500, is that exempting the area between Stanford and Powell Street Bridge, correct?
It's including that area.
So it's including that going through.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, public comment. Seeing none? I have noted the option 2 would prevent something that occurs now, which is cyclists in the bike lane who have to look over their left shoulder and go out into traffic to go around trucks. That seems to be the major danger point. And from my point of view, I think it's a positive safety feature of not just comfort, but I think safety for cyclists. Option one, I think, wouldn't be viable from just the spaces are too tight. It's visually more difficult in those earlier blocks, I think, from a bicycle point of view. So I don't feel comfortable from a safety point of view for option one. But for option two, I think that is a worthy project. But I just have my doubts that the maintenance would be $5,000 to $10,000 a year. That seems outrageously high.
It does seem outrageously high. The way it's calculated, though, is that assuming that we would have a two-man crew out there twice a month, 2 hours each time, that's what it'll come to when you take their fully burdened rate. And the reason why is we'd have to assume that we'd need a hand sweep. We may be able to reduce those costs by using the swap program for portions of the time, but we didn't feel comfortable in relying on that because that's not the most reliable workforce. So that's it. And we did mention in the report that we would have to monitor this, and we'll track it and find out what it really does require. It might not get that much debris accumulated, but our concern was we don't want to create a constrained pathway for the bicyclists and then have debris accumulate in there and basically create in a more unsafe condition. So we would feel compelled to make sure we cleaned it well. Hopefully we could do it for a lot less than that, but that's what the cost comes from.
I'd like to address that concern about the debris accumulation. Currently having construction signs and trucks in the way are causing people to constantly get out of the bike lane. And when there's a large truck with very little visibility, that creates a much more hazardous situation than someone, I mean, it's possible to brake on your bike actually and go more slowly, not having to dart out really fast. I do it a lot. So I think, you know, in terms of overall safety, this would be definitely a net improvement. I also think that in terms of the traffic levels that we were expecting to increase down Horton Street, we need to be forward thinking in how we can help make people stay comfortable in our bike boulevards. We have a transportation center, we have a lot of new residents coming in, and we know that we will be seeing an increase in traffic. And I think this is a really good way to test out something that could be a very useful tool later on. So I am in support of at least doing a pilot on one block, option 2. However, I'd also like to see if my fellow council members are at all interested in doing a 2-block pilot from 53rd to Stanford, exempting the area between Stanford and Powell Street Bridge because that has a lot of problems and would be very difficult to do properly, and then continuing from the Powell Street Bridge to 59th Street.
Okay, say that again. Doing a separate from Stanford to
53rd. Along
okay.
Griffles.
The big issue is really in between, correct me if I'm wrong here, in between Stanford and the Powell Street Bridge. You've got a 9-foot parking lane, you've got a lot of entry and exit ways. It would be very difficult. I mean, perhaps we could do it on the other side of the street, but still it seems a little piecemeal. I've seen that, but it doesn't look great.
There's a little bit of an issue just south of the Stanford intersection where the lanes are already tight, but
Okay.
a little bit south of there, yeah, it could work.
Yeah, wherever it makes sense to draw that line, I'm fine with, but looking at it on those 2 sites as well, which would lower the overall cost of this. So I just was interested in hearing your opinions on that.
I agree with Councilmember Medina. I think I would do a hybrid of the two as well, and I think that what's proposed from the Powell Street Bridge to 59th Street makes sense, and I think that something just south of the Stanford intersection, because I know it's the southbound lane that you're talking about, but something from just south of that to 53rd Street is also necessary, because as someone who walks Horton Street 2 to 3 times a day, it's without fail every day that there are between 1 and 3 delivery vehicles south of Stanford as well. And I've seen multiple bicyclists move around them, and people come around that building has no setback at the corner, and people come around that building on their bike, and bicyclists are not used to stopping at stop signs. They don't see the stop sign because there's a truck parked there, and cars are coming off Stanford Street. And even though we don't have a high incident of historically having accidents, we shouldn't wait for one to occur to take steps that protect bike lanes, because it's not just about the usability of the space for me, it's also the visibility of where a bicyclist is going. So I support what her proposal is.
Can you go back a slide or two? I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Keep going. That one. So I see what you're saying here, and I want to raise the stakes a little bit, because I agree with Councilmember Medina. You know, when I see parking there and I see us breaking up this bike lane, while it'll be challenging on what I'm going to call the east side of that road, what if we did what they do on Oakland, on Broadway, which is where the parking lane, or on Telegraph, sorry, where the parking lane is where the bike lane normally would be, and cars are parking.
We talked about it.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, so the curb geometry there is a little too tight, like it has a tight radius as it juts in to allow for the parking.
I'll take.
So you can't just like do the quick little jog for the.
That's why I said when he said geometry to me, I was like, never mind.
Oh no, that got my interest piqued. I'm putting my trust that you've had this conversation and not
We
wasting your
talked
time.
about it. Yeah.
So no, believe me, geometry got me more interested. Now I want to have the conversation, but I don't want to waste your time. So yeah, I support that idea as well.
I support as well.
So what section would we leave out? We'd leave out.
You're leaving
The
out
street right here.
This one here, Stanford to the bridge, which
Yes.
has the intersection with.
Yeah,
the
that
left.
makes sense. And then, through Griffles, that's.
But giving you wiggle room.
Go back one to see the Griffles one. It looks like there's even, the line of sight are pretty good. Can you go back one slide?
Okay, sorry, what was that? Which one?
Go back one slide. Yeah, here. Yeah, there's a little bit of a wiggle, but not much. And the width is much better. Yeah, there's a little bit of an issue up at the stop sign.
Yeah.
But I guess the bollards would just be discontinuous where it goes up in that section.
Yeah, the wiggle there, it stays at that same cross section as 17 feet from the median to the curb. So yeah, it stays like that even as it wiggles. So.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So
the hybrid idea I'm really starting to like.
Councilmember Medina, is there a motion coming?
Yeah, there's a motion, and I'd like to thank my fellow council members to this test pilot program to improve our street safety and bicyclist confidence in the roads. I also would like to note that I think having 10-foot lanes continuously will also help slow down the speed of traffic, and so I appreciate that. So.
I have two questions before you make your motion. One, is there are we recommending a certain distance between bollards?
10
feet. 10?
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question is, in the picture on the screen right now, that in the right side there, next to the Griffles building at the corner I was just speaking to, the 10-foot and 6-foot space you have, I know that you're saying that 6-foot space is not sufficient for you to do that. How far from that stop sign back down south onto Horton Street do you have that condition? Is it as long as the turn pocket, or is it slightly shorter than the turn pocket?
I think it's about the same size as the left turn pocket. So that's when it kind of gets squeezed down to allow for
That's
that
where a
left
lot
turn.
of the illegal parking takes place, and that's my concern, is people are coming out around it and going around the truck, and it's like literally parked right there.
Maybe we could do a tapered buffer.
Yeah, it's something we can consider as we do it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to, keep my motion to recommend
Which
that
resolution?
and ask you to make it as far as possible.
Okay, so if I can try to make sure I'm capturing your motion correctly.
Two resolutions.
So what we're going to do is, what I'm proposing to do is take resolution from option number 2, which reads, resolution of the City Council of the City of Emeryville to install flexible bollards on Horton Street from Powell Street Bridge to 59th Street and add and from 53rd Street to Stanford. And then we would...
On Horton Street.
On Horton Street.
On Horton Street.
On Horton Street. And then we would also amend the resolved clause in that resolution to include the phrase "and from 53rd Street to Stanford on Horton Street."
Yes.
Okay.
Would the other resolution associated with this item remain the same?
The other resolution would not be adopted. So they were adopting either one or the other.
Gotcha.
So within that, we just talked briefly there about maybe tapering and some other things. We'll have enough leeway within there to make adjustments and come forward with what, or implement, I should say.
That's correct.
A program, okay.
Yeah.
I'll second if that was a motion.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Medina, seconded by Vice Mayor Bowders to adopt the resolution as amended and announced by the city attorney. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we would go on to 12.2.
12.2.
Mayor and council members, you have seen this item previously. This is the follow-on to the emergency preparedness item that you heard earlier in study session, whereby the council would appoint standby officers to have a succession plan in the event of an emergency if any or all of you weren't able to convene a special meeting to declare a disaster, that kind of thing. At the time when I brought this before, you asked that I poll our committee members to see who might show an interest in being appointed. I did that, and I got the 6 names of the folks that I listed in the staff report that you saw, and I gave you an idea of their geographical location just so you could keep in mind making sure that you covered all the areas. Even though we're a small city in square mileage, we have some topographical concerns that might preclude people from being able to get here, so that's something to keep in mind. So since we had the 6, I'm hoping that you all from your other contacts were able to come up with a few more names to round it out, because ideally we would have 3 appointees for each of you. And we would adopt this resolution. Their terms would begin on January 1 for a calendar year, and we would do this every year going forward.
Okay, clarifying questions about this? Public comment. Mr. Carpio.
It's going to be on bike lanes.
Hmm?
It's going to be on bike lanes.
Sorry, I left my hand to talk about the bicycle issue, but I do remember last city council meeting, I raised the question about the width of the bicycle way, and if we are going to adopt the use of a tricycle, which is what people do when they carry small children, instead of having them in a queue, they have it side by side, then the standard is 2 meters, which is 8 foot. And here we have 6 feet. So, I mean, we are shortening the availability of the way for bicycle for people who would want to use a tricycle. And I think that I guess it's overlooked, but you know, if we don't have space, then we should cut on the sidewalk, because the sidewalk, very few people use it, and it's always safer, the sidewalk, than the path for the bicycle. So we have to look into taking some of the sidewalk out for the bicycle way to travel, and have 8 foot instead of 6 feet. Thank you.
You're seeing no further public comment. Is there a motion?
Well, I think we're going to go through the list, right? And everyone's going to go. I have just a quick question. I noticed there's one applicant on here whose home city is listed as Oakland. Is that allowed?
It is. It is allowed within the, regulations to have somebody from a nearby jurisdiction as one of your appointees.
Okay, thanks for that.
When I saw this list, I noticed there was not a Triangle resident, so I reached out to my neighbor Brian Carver, who has served on commissions, and through some deal making that I'm not going to go into, he has agreed to be an alternate for me.
That's why he didn't get back to me.
Is he your first choice then? Because we are meant to rank these first, second.
He would be my first choice.
All right, I'll put him down.
I just do your 3. We'll just everyone do them. Do you want to just go down the line and everyone do them? Sure. How do you want to do this?
However you like, assuming that everybody is interested in appointing the folks who have put their names in the hat.
I secured people independently.
Okay, why don't you give me those then?
Okay, so my first person is Elizabeth Cooley. My second person is Gail Donaldson. And my third person is Zoe Chafe. She's on the list.
All right, and I believe I'm going to have contact information for all of those folks you just mentioned for other reasons. But for anybody who gives me a name of somebody who I'm not likely to have contact information, I'll appreciate getting that after, because I'll create a roster with everybody's current contact for obvious reasons. All right, who would like to go next?
I'll go next. I've secured Bobby Lee, who's this city representative to ETMA. And the other person I talked into doing this, it lives too close to me to be a viable replacement for me, so I just want to throw him into the pool, Mr. Timothy Byron, who's a Triangle neighborhood resident as well, so I just wanted to toss him in there.
I have a question for the city attorney, and I'd like to, if I chose to ask Councilmember Martinez to take Zoe and I put Timothy Byron as my third, is there a potential conflict if I die and Diane doesn't?
Well, I'll be
I
very
mean, it's a fair
sad.
question, right? I just want, is there an inherent conflict in that or not?
What would the conflict be?
Just two people potentially on the body at the same time who are, there's not an inherent conflict, right?
I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
so Diane, if you're willing to take
Yeah.
Zoe,
I will-
Timothy Byron
I'll-
as my third person, please.
Is Byron B-Y-R-O-N?
Correct.
So moving Zoe to
Wherever Diane
Councilmember
wants to put
Martinez,
her.
and then you have one more?
And should I select from the group? One, two, hold on. Or
While she's looking over the list, I'm going to jump ahead.
I would like to take Laura McCamey, if that's all right.
So, I'd like to, in deference to Member Bowder's clarification, working on the EDAC and working in Uptown, I would like to put Tracy as my second, and I appreciate her stepping forward.
Okay.
So,
Who's your first?
Ryan Carver.
Who's your third?
And
I don't have one yet.
Oh.
Can we appoint people later on, or is this like our final and last deadline?
well, I'm hoping to get this done tonight if we can, so that I can have it in place for January 1.
Not realizing I could go to the spousal pool.
You actually can, correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry, but like, they can have another person who's on another person's list already. It's just that we would, if like your person was, we hopefully don't all die, right?
Right,
So
right.
they can be used in multiple places if
That's true.
necessary.
They
Yeah.
You
can,
can pick
and
a third person
spouses
that's been
are
picked.
fair game
Got
as
it.
well.
So you.
So why don't we put, yeah.
If you want to pick someone, you can take someone, you can take
Okay.
Tim as well.
I'll put Laura as my number one then. Okay. Can I choose your wife?
Yes, please do.
Okay, and Barbara Hinch will be my number two.
Well, how do you know she's agreed?
She has.
He just
She's-
said she
yes.
did.
Thanks, Barbara.
For the record, my partner is not willing nor interested to be available.
My
I
roommate
don't
did the
think he
same
finds
thing to
this as
me.
much fun as we do.
We should appoint him anyway.
No.
Mayor Donahue, did you want to do
I'm
yours?
sorry to report that I have not done my homework. I have secured
Well, there are plenty
no
of people
one.
on the list.
There's a whole list of
on the list.
people.
I'll take whoever is left.
You have to prioritize them.
You got to put them in order.
Okay, so who's left now?
Well,
I guess-
Michelle,
Joe,
Okay, I'll take Michelle.
Marshall.
So Marshall, Fran, and Alicia.
Okay, sold.
In that order?
Sure.
Christian still needs a number 3, right?
So I was going to double dip on Mr. Byron.
Okay.
Allie needs one more.
I will take. Can I take Zoe as my third? Since she's already agreed to serve. Zoe is my third.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Great, thank you. And then I will populate the resolution attachment with these names, and that'll be that, and they will be notified. And for, I think Timothy Byron is possibly, and maybe, no, Timothy Byron is probably the only one that I don't have.
I'm giving you that
one.
contact information.
Thank you very much.
So we'll need a motion and a...
Yes.
So I'll move acceptance.
I'll second.
Moved by Councilmember Pats, seconded by Vice Mayor Bowders. Councilmember Martinez?
Here, I mean, I.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
Thank you.
12.3, consideration of Transportation Committee recommendation for request for the approval of public short-term parking Phase 2 for the public market project.
Good evening again, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Staff recommends that council consider and approve the Transportation Committee's recommendation to approve the public market short-term parking Phase 2 project. And we'd be happy to describe the parking space a little bit more for you, but this was all part of the approved plans. Now we're coming forward. Would you like more?
I have no needs for further description.
Well, we were at the meeting.
Public
Yeah.
comment?
Any clarifying questions about this? Okay, public comment. Mr. Carpio.
I haven't seen any indication that those parking are going to be covered with solar panel. Do we have anything like that, or is it do you just forget? I mean, we talk about it that we would use the solar energy to recharge the battery there of solar of electric car, but then anything. I mean, if you go to San Jose, Hayward, and all that, they have parking and they have solar panel everywhere over the parking. Why don't we have any? I mean, we spend millions of dollars for. I mean, I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just mentioning that I haven't noticed anything about it. Thank you. And you mentioned that last time.
Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none.
I want to wait till he puts his headphones on. Andre, can you hear me? Andre, can you hear me? Yeah, so this is not the permanent parking that's being discussed. This is a temporary phase parking as the construction goes on. So I'm pretty sure Andrew can talk about other things that are going on related to solar and parking at this project if that's of interest to him. But this is just a temporary phase of parking, so it's not a permanent parking situation. I understand what your concern is about getting to that point. This is literally while they build the street and the buildings around it, the need to move the parking that exists as we get to that end goal. So the city is interested in solar panels at parking. It's just that that's not what the purpose of this item is. I just want to make sure you knew that.
I thought that even temporary could have.
It's very expensive to install solar for temporary purposes. Yeah. Thank you for asking, though. I'll move approval.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Bowders, seconded by Councilmember Pats. Councilmember Martinez? Councilmember Medina, we'll come back.
Aye.
Now my rhythm is off. Councilmember Pats?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
Mayor Donahue?
Aye.
And Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay.
12.4, consideration of the installation of a 4-hour green parking zone.
Before you present, may I ask, City Attorney, is there any reason why I'd be recused from the creation of 4-hour parking near my home?
No.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, very briefly, there's a request to address some concerns at the corner of Halleck and Sherwin. The initial request was to place a red curb zone in that area to limit the parking for the excessive parking of, in many cases, larger vehicles that block the view of the police in that area, and then some of the activities occurring in the area less than favorable. The Transportation Committee heard this item twice. The first time we presented it, there was a request from the Transportation Committee to hear from the police, specifically whether they needed to have that kind of visibility and have a red curb in the area. So I went to the site with Lieutenant Allen. We visited the site on September 20 after the July meeting, and then took a look, and Lieutenant Allen determined that he did not need to have a red zone, and this would also take away very limited parking within the city. But came up with the idea that a limited duration parking or a 4-hour green zone may be able to accomplish and address some of the primary concerns that were brought up. And that's what was recommended and brought back to the Transportation Committee, and the Transportation Committee has forwarded that here for approval, consideration and approval.
Clarifying questions? Public comment? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Pats, seconded by Councilmember Martinez. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. 12.5, consideration of proposal, cancellation of a portion of the city council meeting on November 21st.
As council is aware, the meeting on November 21st is going to be a shorter version of the meeting. It's the week of Thanksgiving, and it's also the night we are going to do our council reorganization. So we would like to conduct the business that must be conducted earlier in the evening and cancel just the regular city council and successor agency meetings for that night and hold only special meetings. You previously, on your successor agency, approved the cancellation of that meeting. This is just the corresponding cancellation of the council's regular meeting that would normally convene at 7:16.
Any clarifying questions? Public comment? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Councilmember Martinez, seconded by Councilmember Medina. Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
And Mayor Donahue.
Aye. Communication and reports, department heads. Planning Director.
Mayor Donahue and members of the City Council, this is my report on the last Planning Commission meeting, which occurred on October 26th. There were 4 items on the agenda. One was a presentation and discussion of the local hazard mitigation plan update, which you also heard tonight. And the other 3, there were no comments, as I think Lori indicated, from either the public or the Planning Commission at that meeting. Then there were 3 study sessions, one on the Sherwin-Williams Architectural Final Development Plan, one on the Sherwin-Williams Public Park and Open Space Final Development Plan, and one on the Adeline Springs project, the 29-unit project at 3637 Adeline Street. So there was a lot of discussion on those 3 items, but there were no actions taken because it was just study sessions, and those items will all be coming back to the commission at future meetings for decisions or for further study sessions. I'd also like to mention 2 other upcoming events. On Monday, next Monday, November 13th, there will be a public meeting about the Level 4 Bicycle Boulevard traffic calming treatments on Horton Street, 45th Street, and 53rd Street. That will be held at ECCL from 6 to 8 p.m. That is sponsored by Lennar, and that meeting is required as part of their conditions of approval for the Sherwin-Williams PUD. Again, it's Monday, this coming Monday, 6 to 8 p.m. at ECCL. And the other thing is the Shellmound Powell Street Bridge Public Art Project will have a lighting ceremony on Tuesday, December 12th. I don't have the exact time, but I'm told that it will probably be around 4 p.m., between 4 and 6 p.m. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Is the tree lighting include a parade?
It's not a tree lighting, it's a column lighting.
Okay.
Lighting the columns under the bridge where the public art is being installed.
Now I understand what you're
Those
saying.
tiles.
What day is it?
It's Tuesday, December 12th.
12th? And the time? I'm sorry.
Well, I don't have the exact time, but it's estimated at 4 to 6 p.m. So if you recall, that public art project includes both wrapping the columns with tiles and special lighting of the columns. So they'll be turning on the lights.
It looks good, by the way.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, any further member or department heads reporting? Seeing none.
Got one
Oh,
for you.
excuse me, Chief.
Thank you. I just want to mention 2 events. We had a request from Vice Mayor Bowders about our canine training, and I want to extend the invitation to all of you. The canine training is scheduled for next Monday at 6 p.m. If you would like to attend, please let me know. And the meeting you can come to. The day is Monday, the 13th, at 6 p.m. Meet at the police department, and we will then do a little briefing there and take you to the training site. And then on Wednesday morning, we have another Coffee with a Cop at Ruby's Cafe from 8 to 10 a.m.
Okay, that takes us to council members reporting on meetings attended.
Oh, I attended my first bike share accessibility meeting, and I gotta say, there's a lot of interest in broadening accessible use of bikes, and they repeated over and over that even though Oakland is funding it, other cities can say that they are interested in adding accessibility to their stations as well, for the scope of what might happen after the pilot project. So I want to keep that in mind.
And I wanted to note that there's actually a meeting here on, I want to say it's Monday. Monday evening at 6:30 is the Citizens Advisory Committee for East Bay Community Energy. So if anyone would like to meet me here on the garden level at 6:30 on Monday, we'll be meeting with that group, and the public is welcome to attend and understand a little better what we're doing with community choice aggregation here in Alameda County.
Is that a rotating meeting?
It's a rotating meeting, and the chair is trying to move the meeting around the county to give better access to folks who live in different parts of Alameda County.
Cool.
Who would be attending from the staff?
From that, the executive director will be there. So
Really?
if you, Scott, would have a direct access to Nick Chassett, who also has requested some time on a future agenda to give us an update on the CCAs the CCA in Alameda County, and just make sure that council and the community are aware of the work that we're doing.
So that's this coming Monday.
This coming Monday will be the Community Advisory Committee. So they tend to get very into the weeds on whatever topic we're discussing. So there will be, you're looking at energy a lot right now yourself on your own. So I'm sure you'll be interested. But for those members of the public who would like a more broad education on community choice aggregation, I would recommend shortly, we're going to schedule like 15-minute presentation by the executive director of East Bay Community Energy, either in the last meeting in December or the first meeting in January. So I'll note that again when that gets scheduled. That would be a better introduction to CCA. This meeting that's happening on Monday is going to dive more into what is happening institutionally as we're trying to ramp up the authority.
Okay. Thanks for your work on that.
Thank you.
Any further announcements? Future agenda item requests.
I have a small one, and speaking to the city clerk, if you look right below on our agenda, on December 5th, we're going to have the regular meeting where we do all of the meeting schedule approval, renewing council and regional committee appointments, all those things. And I was going to ask, I had just a couple items in the bylaws. I know we we did like a very comprehensive review last year. I just have a couple of really small items actually that are not comprehensive in any way, shape, or form. But in speaking with the clerk, it was advised that if everyone's okay putting that on the agenda, just a couple of tweaks to how we capture things on the agenda was going to be what I asked, if everyone's okay with that for the 5th as well.
Are you going to, are we possibly going to address, I'll be sad to see our mayor go.
Oh,
but are we going to talk about our pledge?
That's one of the two
songs.
things. Well, Mr.
It was
Mayor,
an era. We had an era.
Mayor, I think we should have a conversation about it.
Well, I recognize
There may be a new song.
limited.
Yeah, listen, you come with your best pitch, and I don't mean song. So is everyone okay with putting that on, a
I'm
couple
fine.
brief items on
Yes.
that? Okay.
It
But we
sounds
did it,
great.
we actually, I should say, the reason Sherry asked me to do it that way was in case somebody else had we'll just put bylaws generally.
Yeah.
So if you had something else, you should feel free to let staff know about
I want
it.
to put fowls back into the
Wild
prohibited animals.
game.
Yes. And I have one small thing for a future agenda as well. I had a meeting recently with a representative from Restaurant Opportunity Centers, and they deal with several things, but a couple of that we talked about are one, racial equity in the restaurant industry and high road restaurants in terms of paying a living wage. We already do that here in Emeryville, but in terms of racial equity, they provide a lot of tools to the restaurant industry that helps restaurant owners and managers assess how they're promoting folks and how they're making sure that everyone has the level playing field in terms of opportunity. And in terms of putting this on a future agenda, I'm just interested in discussing with staff and then eventually with council whether it might be appropriate to provide material support to this advocacy group in terms of just lending them a space where they would be able to hold a meeting with local restaurants. So.
Diane, we might also work through Chad and Economic Development as a good way to distribute that material and promote it.
Okay. But so the item on the agenda would be whether or not we would.
To get like information and decide like what direction to give? Is that kind of the goal?
Well, it was just, we could discuss what Restaurant Opportunity Centers does, and we could also discuss whether or not we would be willing to provide material support in terms of a place for them to have a meeting space to invite local restaurants to collaborate.
I'm fully supportive of the concept, so it's not a hard thing for me. My question was going to be just, do you think before it comes to us, do you think it makes sense to ask EDAC to review it at all? Is there any benefit to that or not? Do you think?
I think that would be completely appropriate.
Okay.
There's no rush
I'm
on
completely
this.
supportive of of what you're asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that
Seems
would be
good.
a great place for it to start.
Okay. I support.
Yeah.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, that's okay. The next meeting, because we just canceled the 21st meeting. What time do we start on the next time?
So we'll start with the study session at 4:30,
Okay.
and then the regular meeting will begin on or about 5:15.
It's not a regular meeting.
Excuse me.
The whole thing is a
special meeting
Okay.
with that one item, which is the cannabis permit.
Okay.
That will be followed by the reorganization.
Cannabis. Okay.